it started to feel a little bit gloomy, back end of 23, early into 24, as the Ukrainian advantage, they throughout 23, although they weren't making decisive gains, it still felt as they just about had the advantage. They were making most of the plays, if you like, and slowly that ebbed away. And the Russians started to make some moves, and it felt as though they might just slowly almost overwhelm the Ukrainians through attrition, just slowly bludgeon their way forward. They haven't been able to do that. So why? Well, firstly, because the Ukrainians continue to be exceedingly resilient defenders. They just absorb this stuff. They're defending very well. They're making an absolute art of, the limited resources they've got. That's thing one. Thing two, that the Russian military throughout the hierarchy are simply not good enough. So, their soldiers on the ground, poorly trained, low morale, poor discipline. And they know that their chance of survival as individuals are very, very low. So their fighting prowess down on the battlefield is extremely low. That continues to be the case. But what they have also failed to do throughout the war is to really bring smart plays. Think of an American football team. Often it's about, I'm no expert, but it's often about the quality of the plays, the moves they deploy on the field. Russia has had no plays. All it has been able to draw out throughout the war, really from the end of month one, when the war started, the initial front line started to stabilize, is to bludgeon the Ukrainians, suffer enormous attrition in doing so, use huge amounts of artillery, but try and just bludgeon their way forward. They don't appear to have, and they have not appeared to have, any kind of really smart moves in their pocket. So when their attack came in Kharkiv in the north, whenever that was in May, the thinking was, the analysts were saying, I think quite rightly, that what the Russians would be trying to do is open up a new front in the north. So you then draw Ukrainians' reserves to defend in the north, and having pulled the reserves, you then attack elsewhere. It's a fairly classic military play. You try and get the defender moving in lots of different directions to block, and then somewhere along the line, the attacker finds a point of weakness, and they go through, and you overwhelm their defenses. A good ploy. Fairly standard. It's quite hard to defend against. The Russians have simply not managed to do that. So the kind of the follow-up attacks just haven't really come. So we're in a situation now where the Kharkiv offensive seems to have, it hardly took any ground in real terms, and the Ukrainians now seem to kind of be slowly pushing them back. So go back to your original question: lack of command quality right at the top, all the way through to just poor soldiers on the ground who aren't good enough and whose heart isn't in the fight.
Well, that brings us on, I suppose, to what Ukraine could do to take advantage of the situation and potentially launch a counteroffensive. I mean, first of all, there's the question of when. Most people seem to think we're looking at 2025 until there's a realistic counteroffensive. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I always say with these things, none of us commentators have any inside track. The Ukrainians very wisely have tended to be quite cautious in what they've shared with the public when they have shared it. Sensibly, it hasn't always been, the facts. They've been using information and disinformation because they want surprise on the battlefield. So we're speculating. We're trying to join dots, but the dots would suggest that 2025, spring of 2025, would seem sensible, because we know what happened in 2023. I've already discussed it today about how when they didn't get the resources from Western nations until too late, they weren't able to pull it together into the full orchestra of war. I think the lesson they will have learned is that we've got to get all this aid. We've got to get ourselves in really good order, absorb, what Russia can throw at us through 2024, and then go in 2025. They don't appear to be on the cusp of ending now. We're in the height of summer. There's still, multiple months left of, if you like, of good weather. But it would feel as though that they're not losing significant train in 2024. So it doesn't feel as though they're under huge operational pressure to make an early move. So I would have thought they will hold till 2025. Again, there's a bit of politics, a bit of global politics, US election and other things. We might come back to what other politicians are saying outside of Ukraine, potentially unhelpfully. But it feels as though they've got a little bit of time on their hand. So, based on what I know, 2025 seems a reasonable bet at this stage.
And of course, I just wanted to ask you, Rupert, about some interesting reports from the Institute for the Study of War saying that the Kremlin is continuing efforts to recruit former Wagner mercenaries. It's passing a new bill, apparently, that's going to exempt many of those involved in the attempted mutiny of last year. And when you think about that, it does beg the question, is that a sign of Putin's desperation, that he's having to recruit people who a year ago were working towards overthrowing him?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely. What was it, June 24th? So, we're a year and 2 days after Prigozhin's failed march on Moscow. And yeah, I mean, I think it absolutely is a sign of desperation. But we see those signs of desperation all over. So, we know he's short of fighters. To be fair to Prigozhin, the Wagner fighters were, more effective than many others. So you can see why Putin would want to bring those into the fold. Putin is in a desperate position. The International Criminal Court has just brought warrants against his old defence minister and his old chief defence. The EU continues to bring sanctions. Things are not going well for Putin in real terms. And so I think all these things are a sign of desperation. The fact that he's coaching up to North Korea, doesn't exactly bode well for where Putin is in the greater scheme of things. The fact that the attack in Dagestan 3 days ago, he tries to blame on Ukraine and NATO. I mean, it would appear to be the rantings of a lunatic, except of course it's not. It's very deliberate plays, it's very deliberate misinformation that in this global era of digital news, the news is omnipresent, anybody can kind of make the news. A sizable minority will believe those sort of conspiracies. That it's not IS who did this, that it is somehow it's Ukraine, it's NATO. It plays into the Farage type comments of NATO provoking. It's all of that kind of conspiracy based version of news.
How would you assess Putin's position domestically, internally within Russia? I mean, just thinking back to that mutiny, as you say, literally just over a year ago, there was a lot of speculation that he could be sort of teetering in his position in the Kremlin. Since then, of course, he appears to have stabilised things. Russia have made some advances on the ground. He won, quote unquote, his re-election earlier this year. Are we maybe guilty of assuming he is more secure than he is in his position?
Yeah, it's so hard to tell, isn't it? One would hope that intelligence agencies have a better inside track, though penetrating, Putin's inner circle to really understand what's going on has always been hard. And I assume, so it's hard to know. And again, we and media commentators were speculating and trying to kind of read signals. But it does feel as though he is more secure than he was a year ago. Even at the time of Prigozhin's uprising, most people were saying slightly careful what you wish for, because if Putin did fall, what would happen internally in Moscow? Who would take his place? Would there be some kind of internal bloodletting? So caution. He certainly appears to be more secure than he was, but it's very hard to tell. He's got rid of two of his great loyalists, as I mentioned earlier, Shoigu and Gerasimov, his defense ministers and chief defense. They've gone. But he's a great survivor, isn't he? So given the UK current political betting scandals, I sure wouldn't be betting on Putin going or staying.
Thank you for watching Frontline for Times Radio. For more on global security and the war in Ukraine, you can listen to Times Radio, take out a digital subscription to the Times, and click subscribe on our YouTube channel.